Hi, I'm Dave Hilowitz. So every few weeks, I release an instrumental track on Spotify, and as part of the release process, I have to create album art. Creating album art usually takes me like 15, 20 minutes, not a very long time. And the reason it's so quick is because I actually have a system in place, a system which I will show you now. Check it out. So before we can get started, we need to talk a little bit about what our goals are in producing a cover. I draw a sharp distinction between album art, which I often spend weeks on, and track art, which I kind of have to be able to crank out. So what are our goals? First, we want our cover to look good and draw people in. It has to have a sort of clean aesthetic. It has to be quick to produce because we're going to be doing one every time we release a track, and releasing a track every 2 or 3 weeks means that you're going to have to be making covers every 2 or 3 weeks. And finally, every time you make a cover, you want it to look like it comes from the same artist, so that when you've got all of your covers together, it doesn't look like you have like 9 different brand identities. Because essentially, when you're releasing music, you are actually doing a kind of branding. Nobody likes to think of themselves like that. We like to think of ourselves as artists, but to a certain extent, a lot of the same rules apply. So how do you achieve a consistent aesthetic across many different pieces of art? Well, you have to do the same sorts of things. Choose a font that you like a lot, that you're going to use on every single project. Whatever you choose, Helvetica, Times New Roman, something more obscure, it's going to be your font for, the foreseeable future. So choose something you like. Another way to be consistent is to always position your text in a similar fashion. So, for example, I always put my text in the top left-hand corner. I've seen other people do it kind of like center with center-aligned stuff. Pretty much whatever you do, as long as you're consistent, that's what really matters. When I think about being consistent in cover art and that sort of thing, I think of something that I refer to in my own head as the Uniqlo wall of sweaters phenomenon. Uniqlo is, of course, a big clothing retailer, and the way that Uniqlo displays its clothes is very specific. They'll choose an item like a cashmere sweater, which they produce in, 48 different colors or something, a large number of colors, and they'll display it in this very orderly grid, so that you're looking at something that kind of like looks almost like a Pantone color wheel or like a rainbow or something like that, and it has a dazzling effect. When you take any of the items out of that wall, it sort of retains some of that magical quality. As a shopper, I can say I've purchased some of the sweaters. You feel special because you purchased something that once was part of a grid, even though what you're taking home is actually just a regular sweater. I think albums are a lot like that. So the visual impact of going to somebody's Spotify profile can be pretty much the same as seeing a retail display. It almost doesn't matter what the aesthetic is. If you repeat anything with only subtle variations over and over again, it starts to look like you had a master plan. So that's definitely my design philosophy when designing track art. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about images. When I'm making track cover art, I generally stick to only one image. Generally, the more focal elements you have, the harder it is to get everything to kind of blend together. And I generally stick to abstract images because they're extremely easy to source. One great source of abstract art for me personally is my 4-year-old son, who basically opens up my iPhone camera app and just presses the shutter when it's pointed at like any old thing. One thing he really likes to do is turn the flash on and point it right down at the ground. And that results in images that look like this. These images, with their kind of like natural gradients that are produced by the iPhone camera lens not being able to focus properly, or the flash going off in a sort of uneven fashion, are perfect for cover art. Other places to look for source images are pretty much everywhere. In fact, I'm going to go around this room right now and take a bunch of photos, and then we can use them for the next segment, which is going to be in Photoshop. Okay, so here are my images that I took just from taking photos around the office, and we're going to turn those into a piece of cover art. So I'm going to be doing this in Photoshop, but I think all of the core tips can be done in pretty much any decent image editing software. Photoshop is obviously pretty expensive, not really necessary for this kind of task. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to load up my song template. Basically, all of my tracks have my name up here in the top left-hand corner, and the track title. The track title is always bold. My name is always in Helvetica Neue thin. So that's basically like the convention that I've come up with. It's very plain, and I think that's kind of like what I like about it. So let's bring some of these images in. In Photoshop, you can just kind of bring images in by dragging them. So here, obviously, it's not filling the canvas. We're going to expand it out. So this is a photo of my wall, and on its own, it's pretty bland. Let's pull another image in and see if we can combine the two. So generally when I'm working with abstract images, I like to have an image that provides the color, and then I like to have another image that kind of provides the texture. And for texture, you can take photos of pieces of paper, cardboard is really good, and then you can use the blending modes, which is this menu here on the right, and you can basically just go through these until you find something that looks like that's pretty cool. That's beginning to look a little bit more textured in a pleasant way. Okay, I'm just going to keep playing with this and see where that takes me. Okay, this has a lot of texture, so I think this is going to be really useful. Okay, and maybe we'll go like that. So now, once again, I'm using the blend modes dropdown. My goal is to find a setting that allows some of the texture to imprint itself on the image I already have, but that still keeps that nice natural gradient from the wall picture. Oh, that was kind of good. Kind of like that one. So now I'm going to repeat this process yet again with another image. Bring it in, scale it, and find a blending mode that works. At this point, I have 4 different images all stacked on top of each other. Okay, so I think this is looking pretty great. The one problem, of course, is that this, my track title, is completely illegible. So we're going to fix that by first, we're going to do a horizontal mirror so that this corner, the top right-hand corner, is actually where the top left-hand corner is. Because remember, my title has to be in the top left-hand corner. That's part of my brand identity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of my image layers in a group, and I'm going to call it images, and then I'm going to flip horizontal. Okay, so that's part of the way there. Now what I want to do is I want to make this part much, much darker. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to apply a darkening effect, but I'm going to use a mask to only apply it to where the text is. I'm going to click here, and that's going to add a brightness contrast filter into my layer stack. I can then use a little panel that pops out to adjust the brightness. At this point, my goal is to make the entire picture very, very dark. I want to figure out exactly how dark I would need to make the background in order for it to be super easy to read that text in the top left-hand corner. And that's perfect. Like, I can really read that. In fact, I'm going to change this so that I feel like I'm actually working. I'm going to call this empathy gap. Let's imagine that I made a track called Empathy Gap. Of course, we don't want this entire image to be dark. We only want the top left-hand corner where the text is to be this dark. So here's how we fix that. That brightness contrast filter we added, it's actually subject to a mask. A mask is basically like a secret black and white image that's exactly the same size as our image here. And that secret black and white image tells the brightness filter where it should be active. Wherever there's white, it's active, and wherever there's black, it's completely inactive. And if it's like gray, it's like partially active. If you look at the layer list in the bottom right-hand corner, you can actually see the mask we're working with. It's that white square right next to where it says brightness contrast. What we want, of course, is for it to be white up here and then black everywhere else. But we don't want it to be a stark line, because if it's a stark line, then it will look terrible. Here, I can actually show you what that would look like. Look like this. So that looks awful. So the way that we get around that, we can actually keep this and we can fix it from here. The way that you get around that is by actually editing that mask using the eraser. And the eraser tool is here, and we want a nice soft brush. When you have your colors set to black and white, if you hit X, you can actually swap between them. So right now I'm getting rid of the mask, which I don't necessarily want to do. Right now I'm adding to the mask. And I find that this hand way of doing things, just like clicking, 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 results in something that's way more natural looking than like if you were to use a gradient or try to do it in an automated fashion. And it doesn't take that long.
Okay, I think that looks pretty good now. We might actually be done.
And just like that, we've got a perfectly usable piece of cover art. In summary, here are my tips. Be consistent. Remember, you are building a brand. Use the same font every time, and even more than that, make sure you use the font in a similar way each time. It doesn't have to be as boilerplate as what I'm doing, but yeah, it does have to be consistent. In the same vein, choose similar images every time. Abstract images can be sourced from anywhere. Take photos of your windowsill, your jeans, the wall, anything. If your images are low quality or they don't for some reason work, apply filters and then layer other texture images on top of them. If you're using Photoshop, definitely play with the blend mode dropdown. Yeah, extremely powerful. Finally, if you're having trouble getting your text to sit right with your images, try darkening or lightening a portion of the image drastically, and then use the mask tool to transition from the dark to the light version of the image more gradually. Okay, I think that's it. If you enjoyed this video, it'd be great if you could hit like, and if you've not already done so, I highly recommend subscribing. It's a great way to see more videos like this. Yeah, a lot more stuff on the way. Now I just have to go write a track called Empathy Gap. See you next time.